Hello, I'm Tim Paterek, and we're going to build a custom rack today. The bicycle I've chosen for this custom rack is a custom tandem that I built, and the back end of this tandem is really small. This is just a tiny back end, and because of that, these seat stays come up at a pretty shallow angle, which means that if you were to put a regular rack on here, you'd probably have to have some kind of an extension to get from the seat stays all the way back to the rack. And so this is a really good reason to build a custom rack for this particular bicycle. The first step that we need to do is we need to level the bicycle. So if we look down here, you can see that I've got a little line level. You can pick these up at the local hardware store. I think they're made by Stanley. And I've suspended this line level on a thin thread between the axles. And so we have the bike leveled right now. And with the bike leveled, we can build the rack level, and it will have an appealing look to it when it's finished. We're going to make this rack about 12 inches. We want to make sure that the front end of the rack is well behind the back end of the rider so that when you pile things on this rack, they don't interfere with that person. We're going to have the center of the rack basically directly over the center of the wheel, and the back end of the rack at 1 foot. Here's 0 and here's 1 foot, basically centered over the wheel. A good distance to have your rack from your tire would be about 1.5 inches. And to do this, I've taken a 2x4 and I've just taken a rubber band to hold it in place. And this is what my rack is actually going to sit on while we're doing the fitting. The 1.5 inches will give you a nice distance for a fender above your tire, and it'll clear underneath the rack. So 1.5 inches, that's good. And the 2x4 is easy to find, makes things simple. If we take a look down here, we can see that I've taken a tow strap and I've fastened the rear wheel to the seat tube so that the wheel won't turn while we're doing our fitting. Let's take a look at our supplies here. We're going to be using mostly chromoly aircraft tubing, and the size that you're going to order when you make one of these racks is a 3/8 outside diameter by 0.028 wall thickness. You need to make sure and order a 0.028 wall thickness because that particular size telescopes very nicely for silver soldering with a 5/16. And I do have a shorter section right here of 5/16 that I'm going to be using to sleeve and to put these pieces together with an internal sleeve made of 5/16. You can get your aircraft tubing from a variety of suppliers. Some of the suppliers I've used over the years are WAG Aero and Dillsburg Aircraft. And then this particular company that I ordered this from is from Wix Aircraft, and they have an 800 number and a nice catalog, lists all their aircraft sizes. Make sure and order round aircraft tubing. These places do sell Aero cross-section tubing, and I don't think that would be as easy to work with. One tool that we need to look at, and that is the tubing bender. This is a tubing bender I've had for a number of years. It's made by Rigid, and I think this has been discontinued. It's an older one. You may have to go to some online internet auction or something to see if you can find one of these. But this is made for bending specifically 3/8 OD tubing. And they do come in different sizes. They make quite a range of these. You can get them for 3/16, 1/4 inch, whatever. But this one is definitely the best one around. I have another one that I'd like to show you, so let's take a look at that. If you're having trouble finding one of those Rigid brand tube benders, there are a variety of these that are available. This one is called an Imperial. It actually bends 3 different diameter tubing sizes, and you can probably see in there that the holes are actually, I believe it's 3/8. This goes all the way from it says 3/16 1/4 inch, 5/16, and 3/8. So I guess you can probably fudge it a little bit between a couple of the sizes and use the grooves as you need to. These aren't quite as strong as the rigid, and I would shop around. This one looks better than the ones I've seen. I've seen some that will just self-destruct on you the first time you use them. But this, I would look for this Imperial brand. It seems to be fairly well made. Now, I've decided that my rack is going to be 12 inches long from front to back, and then I measured the distance between my dropouts from the center of one eyelet to the center of another eyelet, exactly how wide it is between the dropouts. Actually, not the axle width, but to the center of the eyelets. And I came up with 5 3/4 inches. So I think this rack would probably look good at about 5 3/4 to 6 inches wide, so that it sets directly over the frame as it goes down. So we're going to make it 6 inches wide and 12 inches long. If I add up my 4 sides of my rack, I come up with 36 inches. Just in case I cut myself a 40-inch piece of 3/8 tubing, you'll notice that I have it in the tubing bender. This little clip right here holds the tubing in place. I have there's this double mark right there for the center of the 40-inch piece. That's at 20 inches. And then I have another mark 3 inches and 3 inches from each side of that. And I've got this mark out here a little ways so it lines up with the top of the radius here. And we're going to take this and we're going to clamp it in the vise. Not too tight, you don't want to crush the tubing. And then put the swing arm here against your tube, and this stuff bends just beautifully. And there's also a gauge on here that tells you what degree you're bending to. We'll go a little bit beyond 90 because it's going to spring back a little bit. There we go. I went to about 92 or 93 degrees, and here we have a really nice bend. No kinks or ripples or anything. Large part of that is due to the wall thickness. If you use a thicker wall, if you try using an 035 or an 049, I can guarantee you're going to have some nasty ripples and possibly even a kink. So the 028 tubing wall is definitely the preferred size. Now we're going to put it on this side. And this is the tricky part, because because this is too long right here to fit in that little 6-inch section, we have to go the opposite way. So again, I'm going to put my mark, that 3-inch mark, 1 3-inch mark there, 1 3-inch mark there. I'm going to put that 3-inch mark right about, right through there. Okay, let me point at it with some. I'm going to put that 3-inch mark right slightly below this point. Okay, then clamp it. And then we're going to put it in the vise again. Now, very important here, we need to do some eyeballing and make sure. And the way I like to do this is I like to swing that swing arm out like that, and I use that as a comparison with my tube out here, and I get them so that they're continuous like that. See? Okay, then take my swing arm and I bend. Now I went a little bit beyond here, but it's pretty easy to just kind of tweak it back out again. And let's see, let's take our tape measure and see what we got for a width here. Now I went a little bit over, but that's okay. We'll just have a little bit wider rack. my angle's bent here. Okay. Now you notice we got a little bit of warp to this. It's like a bent cookie sheet, you know, warped cookie sheet, and we don't want that. So we're going to want to kind of tweak it a little bit so it sits nice and flat on the table. We have our width. Now let's get our length here, which is 12 inches. I'm going to measure this from the center back here up to here, 12 inches right there, and another one on the other side, 12 inches right there. So we have two marks, both marks at 12 inches. Okay. Here I've got the tubing bender with the swing arm on the outside, and I have the short stub here gripped by the tubing bender, because this is too short in here to stick the handle, so we've got to work from the other side. My 12-inch mark, I don't know if you can see it there, but I'm going to make sure that my 12-inch mark when I do this side is exactly the same location as my 12-inch mark when I do this side. Okay, and I got that 12-inch mark. I'm just going to line it right up along the top of that arc right there. Put it in the vise. And we'll grip up on that. Swing the swing arm out like that, and then we'll, like we did before, we're going to get this level with this so that we're bending all in the same plane. I'll sight in on that. It looks like they're both in the same plane. My mark right at the top of the arc. Tighten a little bit. Careful not to crush your tubing. Okay, now this is going to run into things, so I'm going to lift that out of the way. And I'm going to go just a hair past 90. And as I mentioned earlier, it is possible to tweak these angles a little bit. If you do go over a little bit, a couple degrees over, you can tweak it back again without putting kinks in it. You can probably tweak it 2 or 3 degrees without putting a kink in it. All right, we're going to take our tool and flip it to the other side. All right, here I have it set up. I had to actually take my mark and kind of extend it around the tube because I'm working on this from the other side now, so that I can continue to have this base on this side of the bend and my swing arm up here on the outside of the bend. Otherwise, this is too short of a section in here to put this lower base. All right, I'm going to line that mark up. So again, I'm right at the top of that radius. And we're going to clamp this into the vise like so. And it looks like it's lined up in the right spot, and we'll bend. And again, I'm just going to gently lift this other part out of the way as we make our bend. And I went about 92 degrees there. And let's see what we have here. There, we're looking pretty good. This angle here needs to be opened up just a little bit. And then what we're going to do is we're going to cut both of these so they meet in the middle. You can see right now that we're overlapping. All right, now we're going to cut first one side, roughly in the middle. I'm trying to keep these two separated here. I don't want to scar that side of this tube. I don't want to scar that, so I'm trying to keep them separated so I don't scar it. There we go. Now we're going to check our width here. Make sure we have the same width, top and bottom. Yeah, that looks very good. Very good. So now pop it apart about 1 millimeter for the saw blade width for the kerf. And there it is right there. And as you can see, it looks like a pretty good rectangle. Pretty good. All right, if you take a look here, you'll see that we're not quite in the same plane all the way around, so I have to do a little bit of tweaking here. So I need to get this thing to sit flat, and this may take a little bit of fussing around. Also, let's go over to the vise here, because this one little short section is slightly out of the plane, so we need to tweak it a bit so it's in the same plane there. And tweaking there. Anyway, you'll just have to play with it a little while until you get it to rest nice and flat on a true surface. All right, now we've got a bit of a burr between these two surfaces here. So we'll just run that file between there and clean that burr up. And the other side is cut just a little bit crooked. Incidentally, the file I'm using is an 8-inch mill bastard by Nicholson. And you want a fairly fine cut here, because you're working with thin tubing. Something with coarse teeth is just going to hop around and make a bunch of unwanted marks on you. Also, a quick word about the hacksaw blades. I'm using a 32 tooth per inch hacksaw blade for cutting thin wall tubing. Anything coarser than that, and you'll have trouble with the teeth hanging up on the walls of the tube. And there we go. Comes together quite nicely. Now, that joint where the rack comes together, we're going to have to sleeve that, kind of like a trombone almost. We're going to sleeve that up and join it and make it look as if it's one piece. That's what I'm going to use this 5/16 tubing for. And I'm cutting a piece here. The sleeve is going to be, it looks like 1.5 inches here. Yeah, about 1.5 inches. And also what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a nick right in the middle of this sleeve. And I'll tell you what the nick is for later. But the nick is very important. So make sure you have that. All right, I have my little sleeve right here, and you notice I have my nick about the center. And the reason for the nick is when you start assembling this, and by the way, I did go inside here with a round file and I deburred the edges so the sleeve would slide in better. So when you start putting this together, if you have that nick in the center, you can tell exactly how much. See, I can see my nick right now. Just as they go together, I can see the nick as it disappears. There we go. Now I know that I have exactly the same amount of sleeve sticking in each side of my joint. Without that little nick, I could have, you know, 1 1/8 inch in one side, and I could have 1/8 of an inch in the other side, and I'd have a very unsound joint. All right, now that my sleeve is all cut and fit and everything, I'm going to prep this joint in Snowbowl toilet bowl cleaner. There are two brands that I really like. They both contain a very mild solution of hydrochloric acid. One is Snowbowl, and the other one is called The Works. And I was able to find The Works at Target. Snowbowl is more available in the Midwest. The Works seems to be available out on the West Coast a little more. Anyway, both of them have a very, very mild solution of hydrochloric acid as an active ingredient. Do not use swimming pool chemicals. Do not go to a chemical supply house to buy hydrochloric acid. Those hydrochloric acids are far too strong to be using on chromoly steel. They will actually cause hydrogen embrittlement of your steel if you submit those. So don't use swimming pool chemicals or any really strong acids. Anyway, that joint will be all cleaned up for silver soldering there. Also, we're going to put a couple of air expansion holes in the bottom, and I'm just going to look at this. There's really no difference between one side and the other, so either or could be the bottom. But as soon as I drill my holes, my air expansion holes, that will determine that side will be the bottom. So I'll drill 2 or 4 1/16 inch air expansion holes, and that will give me nice flow-through airflow so that I don't spatter out of my joint while I'm brazing. All right, we're going to put in 4 air expansion holes here. I decided to go with 5/64 because the 16th bit did not, this particular chuck would not grip the 16th inch bit. I'm doing 4 air expansion holes here. I guess mostly for symmetrics, to make this more symmetric. There we go, we have 4 air expansion holes, 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to flux this joint up right now and get it ready for brazing. We're using a 56% cad-free silver. I recommend the 56% because cadmium has a bad effect on human lungs. It can cause pulmonary edema if exposed to too much cadmium. So make sure and ask for the 56% cad-free silver. This is 1/16 diameter. The flux we're using, this particular flux is Harris Stay-Silv white brazing flux, particularly for silver. Don't use the black flux. Black flux is for things that take long preheats, and this shouldn't take a very long preheat at all. I'm going to stuff a little bit inside the hole, right in there. And then we're going to flux our sleeve also. And I'm going to flux both ends of the sleeve. By the way, you want to make sure and wash your hands after you're done working with this flux. The flux does contain potassium bifluorides, which is a severe skin irritant. So once you touch it, make sure to wash your hands. And you know, be quick about it. Get into the sink in a fairly short amount of time to get your hands washed. I'm looking for my nick. There's my nick. I just lost my nick. There's my nick again. And there we go. Okay, it's all set. And I'm going to put a toe clip around that, toe clip strap or something, maybe some masking tape around that to hold the joint together for brazing. I have my line pressure set at 5 and 5, and I have about a tip with a 35 thousandths orifice here, and I'm going to be using, I've got about 3/4 of an inch there. That's a carburizing flame. Here's a neutral flame, short, carburizing flame, long. Not too loud, not too loud. It's not hissing at me. And we're going to heat up this joint. Our flux will turn to a crust. It went on as a wet paste. It's going to turn to a crust. You notice I have some masking tape down here holding the joint together. Doesn't take much to hold it in place. Your flux will turn to a crust at first. Then it turns to a liquid. Now this is kind of a challenging joint to do because everything is internal. The neighbor's cat has just come to visit us. Gray cat with white boots. He's a very friendly cat. Okay. When the bubbles in the silver solder flux get so small they almost disappear, you're ready to drop silver on it. And there it goes. And then you have to kind of draw it to the sides. Don't be satisfied with just dropping it in the middle. You'll have to warm up and draw it to the sides. Draw some to one side, then draw some to the other side. And sorry if I block your view, but this won't be too long here. Put your silver in there and draw it one side, then the other. Make sure you're pulling silver each direction. And then the very last thing you're going to do, we've got a little bit of a seam here. I think we pulled enough silver in each direction, but we've got a little bit of a seam here. So let's just drop enough silver on the outside to bury that seam. And then we'll clean it up with a file. There we go. Joint's done. All right, now we're going to clean up our joint, and I'm just going to keep rotating this file around the joint. I'm trying to avoid making any facets. I just keep rotating that file around the joint. Again, I'm using an 8-inch Nicholson flat file. And the flux is pretty much just breaking off of here as I'm filing. I wouldn't recommend doing this with brass. Brass flux will be kind of hard on your file, but this silver flux, it is water soluble, so you can take it off in hot water, but it's also softer, so it's pretty easy to just chip away like this. All right, now I'm taking some emery cloth strips. I'm using 100 grit here. I actually like to go a little bit coarser, 80. I prefer 80, but I just noticed that I'm out of 80, so I'm using 100. I like to slide this under my fingers like this, under my thumb. Since we are working on round tubing, shoe shining will work okay. For irregular surfaces, I don't recommend that shoe shining technique, but for a nice round surface, the shoe shining works fine. And there's our finished joint. As you can see, it's looks just about seamless. Of course, when paint goes on there, you won't be able to see that at all. All right, I've gone over to the bike to see roughly what I want for vertical supports. These are going to go up to the middle of the rack, and I'm thinking that I want about 14 inches. So I'm going to cut two verticals at 14. And I'm going to square these tops off. Boy, that's a nasty sound and noise. Usually you can get that noise to quiet down a little bit if you drop your piece in the vise a little bit. Oh, much better, much better. Square that end off. Now I made these two pieces, and I'm going to come in a little closer to the camera to show you. I made these. I actually took these and chopped a pair of 4-inch long 3/8 bolts, and I put a shoulder on one end of them, and that's going to fit down inside the tubing. That's a 5/16 diameter. Then I took the top and flattened them off on my milling machine, and that's where they'll fasten to the dropout eyelets. And these will drop right into that 3/8 tubing. Now, I realize that this may be a little bit fancier than some of you might be able to do if you're working at home. Another option, of course, would be, now I'm going to do this to my paint. I had a painted end of my tube somewhere. I had a painted end. Yeah, there's the painted end. I don't like using the painted end, so I'm going to ruin that painted end. You can take these and just flatten them in the vise. It'll actually do a pretty nice job of flattening them. Flatten them like that and drill a 13/64 hole through there, and you've got a nice tab for the bottom end where you're going to fasten to your dropout eyelet. And if you want to strengthen that tab, of course, you could fill it a little bit with silver, but you're going to round it off and make it look pretty nice, actually. So that's a cheap, quick way of making your tabs to attach your rack. If you want to get fancy, you can do what I did, and you can make these nice inserts to go on there. This is where I've taken and done an estimate where I got my 14 inches from. I put my little pieces that I made in the end of the tube and just ballparked it. It looks, close to 14 inches is what I need there. So that's where I got that figure. All right, I'm flexing these pieces up. We're going to silver braze these together. Anywhere we have a sleeve type joint or any kind of a joint that has plenty of surface area with the two pieces meeting, we'll do a silver braze joint. If, on the other hand, we have a joint where two pieces are just kind of butting against each other, we'll do a brass joint on those. The reason is brass has more strength if it's on its own than silver does. Silver on its own does not have a lot of strength. Silver depends on shear strength to get the strength necessary to hold a joint together. And so when you've got a nice long, we've got 3/4 of an inch here of contact area, and with 3/4 of an inch and a thin film of silver in there, that's a joint that depends on shear strength. And so when we have a joint like that, we're going to silver solder them. There we go. We have our two pieces all ready, fluxed up, and ready to silver solder. So let's go ahead and do that silver soldering right now. I like to do these particular joints lying down rather than sticking up in the air. If you stick them up vertically, the silver tends to run down the tube and make a mess. But if you have them almost lying down flat like this, you drop the silver in and it tends to stay where you want it to stay rather than run down the side of the tube. And here again, we can't see a lot of what's going on inside the joint. So we just need to drop silver on the seam and draw it down with the heat. Drop some silver on the seam and draw it down. Got to heat up down here. Let me turn it sideways so you can see a little bit more of the action that I'm going through here. We're dropping silver right there, and then we're going to draw it down. You see how I'm heating up 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch away from the seam? And I can see it pulling in. It's pulling in quite nicely. That one's done. That looks good. Here again, I watch my silver turn into a crust. And as the steel heats up, the crust will turn into a liquid. And when it's ready for the silver, the liquid will become almost clear. It has little bubbles in it right now, but the liquid will eventually lose those bubbles. Those bubbles will kind of boil out, and the flux will be almost a crystal clear liquid. At that point, you put the silver in. A little bit more heat on the plug than you put on the tube because the plug is heavier. It takes more heat to get the plug hot. And I'm heating up downward. I always like to leave a little bit of extra silver on the surface. That way when I clean it off, the seam will disappear. I just noticed that I have a little bit of a gap on the underside. Not really a gap between the pieces of metal, but there's a little spot here where I'm missing some silver. So I just flipped it over, and I'm going to add just enough silver to disguise that gap. Now I'm cleaning up the joint where I put my plugs in. This is pretty much the same type of cleanup that I did when I cleaned up around the sleeve. Got a little bit of a blob here. Then we'll take the sanding strip, clean up those file marks. There we go. And when that's painted, that'll look like it's seamless. I decided to modify my 2x4 a little bit, and I made it into a double V like that. And the reason I did that, let me get this level again. The reason I did that is because I want my supports that I'm making to come right up into the middle. So I'll take an Allen bolt here and we'll fasten this right to the dropout eyelet. And as you can see, now that I've modified my 2x4, you can see I can bring my strut straight up to the center of the rack. Everything balances nicely. I can come right up to the center. That's why I did that. Let's go back over to the bench, and I'm going to miter the tops of these so they'll have a miter joint where it comes together there. Okay, I've got a 10-inch round file here, and that cuts a pretty nice 3/8 radius, or actually 3/16 radius for a 3/8 diameter. And I'm mitering the top of this where it's going to hit the rack, just like mitering a regular bicycle frame tubing joint. I'm using the other strut as my gauge, and I think we got a usable joint there. Deburr it. And then I'm also going to shoe shine the end of it. Make sure that we have a nice end for silver brazing. The silver will form a little tiny fillet around the outside, as well as right at the end where it meets. And we'll also dip this in acid so we can get the inside cleaned out as well. And I'll fit the other one. Okay, right now I'm making a comparison. I'm making sure that my two struts are exactly the same length. So I'm going to have to do a little bit of adjustment to make sure that they're both the same length when I finish. Now we have our top of our rack, our rectangle, all done. And we have our two vertical struts coming right up to the center of the rack. And right now I'm going to measure to see just how far those are from the rim. Okay, 65 millimeters on that side and 62 on that side. I'm going to bend it a little bit. I think we're going to have to go out to 70 on each side. Bend this one out. And this one is now at 68. This one's also at 68. We still have to go out a little more. This one is 72, 73. Maybe a little far there. Bring this one out to about 70. 70. 71. Just right. Just right. Now I'm going to sight across here. Close one eye, sight across, and make sure that those two verticals line up with each other just right. And basically it's just going to be a balancing act. You know, the center point is going to balance on there, and then we're going to make sure that you know, things line up on the center line of the bike, and we're just going to do a balancing act and a brazing job here all at once. I do need 2 air expansion holes on the inside face of these 2 verticals, so I'm going to do that right now. I'm also going to mark my right and my left, and I'm going to put my L and my R on the outside surface. So because I've done this bending, they have to go back right exactly the same way. Now we need to sand this area where the vertical struts are going to hit, because we're going to silver solder there, and it needs to be nice and clean. And sanding on an outside surface like this is plenty for silver soldering. Also, take a note that whenever I clamp on things, things that I don't want to have distorted or chewed up or anything, I always use these brass inserts for my vise, brass jaws for my vise. You can make them out of brass or aluminum. Just stick them in your vise and hammer them over, and you got a set of brass jaws or a set of aluminum jaws. I prefer aluminum, but I just happened to make a set of brass last time. And that'll keep you from damaging anything that you clamp in your vise. So we're all cleaned up there, and we're ready to flux up and braze. All right, I have made sure with a level that these verticals here are actually vertical, and they look really good. I've got the top of the rack just balanced up there, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tack one little point, because I want to make sure that this piece up here is level as well. There we go, we got it tacked. Turn my torch off for a second. And the tack is small enough that if I want to do any adjustment here, I can actually bend the tack. So to be level, that is level. Now I'm not going to reheat my tack. I'm going to go to the other side of the bike. And I'm going to finish that joint. Okay, now I'll come to this side. And then we'll go back over to this side. That side's all finished, and then we'll finish this side. Okay, let's take a quick look. Great, 71, 70, that's very good. I don't think we have to worry too much. It'd be hard to bend out a single millimeter from one side to the other, so I think we're on the money there. Things are looking good here. Now we have our top and our two verticals pretty well rigid on here, and they're bolted into the dropouts. So everything is ready to go for a set of struts on the back, and I'm going to make those. I'm taking my tape measure and I'm going to make those around 16 inches on a side. So I think I'll cut this thing at 35 inches, just to have a little extra on the ends, and we'll see how it turns out. I can always cut the bottoms off later, but let's try that. We're going to do the back struts now, and I've got a 35-inch piece here. The middle of it is actually about an inch above the top of this because I want the middle to be, you know, over here when I do my bend. So let's make this V-shaped piece. And down about 16 inches from the top, we're going to want to be about 6 inches apart down here. So right now we're at 8 inches. Yeah, we're about 6 inches there. And let's go over to the rack and see how this looks. All right, I'm going to put kind of a compound bend in this back strut. First of all, I'm going to put one bend in like this to have the stays come in so they're more in line with the other stays, and then I'm going to put a little bend back like that for a place to hook on a bungee cord or something. So we'll start with this. Now I'm going to bend this, I don't know, somewhere between 5 and 10 degrees. Not a lot. Very little bend. Like so. And then my mark, I'm going to have to extend around to the other side, so I can do the opposite bend exactly the same way. Again, no more than about 10 degrees. There we have the two going straight down on each side. And then we're going to make sure that these are the width that we need, which is about 6 inches. So we'll have to bring it apart just a little bit. A little bit too much. There we go. 6 inches. Now I'm going to put a little bend like that on there for hooking a bungee cord. And I'll have 1 inch sticking out. 7/8 sticking out. I'm running into the other bend. Seven-eighths sticking out. And there we go. Let's see how it looks. There, if you look carefully, you can see we have one bend right there, and we have another bend right there. And this will be our back strut, our set of back struts coming in. They won't be weight bearing, so there won't be any plugs or anything in here. And the nice thing about this set of struts also is that we have 2 vent holes, natural vent holes here, so we won't have to drill any holes in anywhere. This is where it gets a little difficult. We've got this joint taped right here with masking tape. We've got this joint taped with masking tape, and then back here we have just a strand of masking tape holding this side of the strut in place. Since these are joints that don't form a miter around another tube, or they're not inserted type joints, silver is not the best thing to use here because the silver does not have a lot of strength on its own. These joints would be better done with brass. So we're going to be doing these with brass, and have to work fast here. And also we don't want to ruin any of our components on the bike. So we need to point our flame away from painted areas and away from components. I'm using a neutral flame here, a short neutral flame. There we go, we got a good tack there. Now we need to do a little bit of bending over here because these two aren't meeting the way we'd like them to meet. So we'll bend this apart just a little bit so they meet the way we want them to meet. That looks good, and it's touching nice and firmly. Put a little bit of flux on here. Neutral flame. Again, maybe if I could have one of my assistants hold that piece of housing down. There we have another good tack. Remove the masking tape up here. Hope we can do a little bit of bending. And then we're going to do another tack here, and then we'll remove the rack from the bike, and we'll do some finished brazing, finished brass brazing. And we have 3 nice strong tacks, and that just made our rack quite a bit stiffer. Now we're going to take the rack off and we'll finish brazing it over by the vise, then we'll bring it back over here and reattach it. We're going to just kind of build a little fillet between the 2 pieces of tubing here. It's quite difficult and rather wasteful to attempt to build fillets with silver for a couple of reasons. Number one, you end up with a lot of silver on the floor, and number 2, your silver, a fillet made of silver would not be as strong as a fillet made of brass. So you definitely want to do this with brass. And again, the reason I'm doing this is because these 2 pieces are just bumping against the side of each other. And it needs something more than a silver joint here. Notice I'm plenty far away from my plug down there. I want to make sure that, because my plug is silver brazed in, I want to make sure that I don't come too close to it with this brass joint. And that was one of the things I made sure to monitor as I was fitting this. I wanted to make sure that this brass brazed joint was not going to be too close to that silver brazed joint. The brazing material I'm using here is just 16th inch bronze rod, nothing special about it, just kind of the stuff out of the barrel at the welding store. There we go. Now we have a nice set of verticals coming up here. We have this back set of supports with a nice curvature to it. And we've got that little loop that comes back there where we can hook a bungee cord or something if we want to do a tie down. And now we're going to work on putting some cross members in here so we have a flat area that we can rest things. Here's the beginnings of our rack on the back end of the bike, and I'm seeing that I've got a little bit of a twist. The rack is going a little bit to the right, and I want to cold set that out of there before I start getting any more cross members and supports in this thing, because if I wait too much longer before I do a cold setting, I wouldn't be able to do it this easily. And I think I just got it out. Looks good. Tires running right between our little V-shaped strut here. The verticals are right on 70. Right on. So our rack is sitting here nice and straight. Got a nice true rack here. Okay, now as I said, we're going to start working on the grid work on the top so that things don't fall through the rack. Alright, I'm going to make something here that I like to make when I'm making racks. I like to make a little, like an oval, like a chain link. It's going to look like a chain link when I get done for the center of the rack. It just kind of looks neat. So I'll make half of my chain link here. And I can see I need to bend it just a bit more. This is a 180-degree bend according to my little gauge on the bender. But you have to go past the 180. There's half of our link. Incidentally, if you're ever making those little hangers, those brake hangers for cantilever brakes, if you're not using V-brakes, you're using cantilever brakes, here's the tool to make one of those little hangers. Perfect. And let's make another half of our chain link. Go beyond your 180. And here's the other half of our little chain link. I'll do some fitting and I'll make a couple of sleeves to go in there. Here we have our little chain link that we've made out of our chromoly tubing. We've got the inserts, the 5/16 inserts, and I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little nick in the middle there, so I can tell where the middle of the insert is. So when I put it together, the insert doesn't slide all the way into the one side, and then it's all going to go together like that. So I'm going to flux it up right now, and we're going to get ready to braze here shortly. Well, here we have our chain link. It's all fluxed up, all cleaned and fluxed, and we're brazing it together. Kind of a tricky joint to do because we have to draw silver in and then pull it in two directions, part way into one side of the link and part way into the other side of the link. This link is more of a decorative piece. It won't be holding a lot of weight. It won't be under a lot of torque or anything. it provides a flat surface in the center of the top of the rack to rest things on. I am using a little bit more heat than I usually use on a silver brazing joint, simply because I want to pull that silver in two directions, because this is a little bit more difficult joint to do. I don't think I mentioned earlier, but there are two air expansion holes in this ring. You can see the smoke puffing out of those right now, as I do with every other bicycle frame building tube or rack tube or anything that I'm silver brazing or brass brazing together. I've always got, you can see it coming out here. There, see? There's one hole there and one hole there. Got some nasty stuff in there. I'd like to mention also that this chrome moly aircraft tubing always comes with a black treatment on the surface, and that black treatment must be cleaned off before you ever try to silver braze or brass braze anything to it. The flux will not cut this black treatment that's on chrome moly tubing, so it's got to be taken off of there. And the best way to take it off is just with shoe shine type sanding with some emery cloth. And there we go, there's our piece. It's all brazed together, and we'll clean it up, make it look pretty. I've taken the rack off the bike again. I don't have to worry about it being level for a little while. And we're going to start putting the cross pieces in the top here so we can lay luggage or a rack pack or something on here. So I'm just going to lay in this first one. I'm going to make two of these, and they're going to have to fit just right when they're finished. They'll have to kind of slide in and twist a little bit and pop into place. Here we have the subassembly all ready to go, or the pieces of this subassembly, and you'll notice that each tube has two air expansion holes, two of them in there, two of them in there, and one at each end of our loop or link, whatever you want to call that. And of course the air expansion holes will all face downward on the rack. I have made a little tiny nick on this one because the front may be slightly wider than the back or vice versa. So this one with a little nick is the front position, and that one will go right here, like so. And here's the one that goes toward the rear. And then that link is going to fit in the middle like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to locate exactly where I want that front one, and I'm going to braze the front one in so it's solid, and then we'll go from there. Alright, right now I'm brazing in this top strut, this top cross member, and this is a pretty quick, pretty easy brazing job. Just drop a little silver there and warm it up and get it to go around the other side. This will make the front strut rigid, and then I'll only have the rear strut and the loop to contend with. It'll make things a lot easier to work on. Rather than having three loose pieces, I'll only have two loose pieces. There we go. Here we are, we're all ready to braze this assembly in now. I've cleaned and fluxed the ends of this area for silver because we have a nice large surface area joint there. However, this one and this one have the green flux on them, and that's going to be brass brazed. Just a quick word about brass brazing flux. For brass brazing on bicycle frames or racks like this, or stems or whatever, I recommend using either Allstate number 11, which is a grayish color, or let's see, Welco number 17, which kind of looks like pistachio ice cream, or Henry James sells some blue flux. All three of those fluxes are water soluble. They'll soak off in hot water in about half an hour. Don't use the old style dry powdery flux, and don't use the flux covered rods. That kind of flux has to be chipped off, and you're going to leave some really ugly looking chip marks on your work chipping that flux off with a flux hammer. So let's go over to the vise and braze this together. First joint that I'm going to do here will be the joint, the brass braze joints at the end of the loop. And the reason I'm doing those first is if I do the silver braze joints and lock that strut into place, then it may cool and it may actually pull slightly away from the ring. However, if I tack the ring first, then the cooling will pull the cross member down toward the ring. So I'm gonna tack the ring first, and I'll finish them later. I'm just going to tack them right now. Using a neutral flame here. This is kind of small work, so I'm using a 35 thousandths orifice. Normally, if I were doing fillet brazing on a frame, I'd jump up to about a 50 thousandths orifice. But this is really tiny stuff. Smaller tip is necessary. And I'm going to have to melt a blob here first, because this ring is coming up a little bit. So I'm just going to melt a blob in there, and then I'm just going to grab the nearest device to press this down, and we'll reheat. And press down. Let me get something bigger. Yeah, it's down tight. Okay, now I'm going to switch to silver, so I'm going to back my flame off and make it a carburizing flame. And I can also take these clamps off. Everything is pretty much held in place now. And we'll braze this one. Again, carburizing flame. This is the same as this joint was back here. Just put a gob on top and float it around the rest of the joint, and the silver will just follow that heat right around the joint. That one's done. And that one's done. The whole assembly now is anchored into place, and then I'm just going to do some touch-up brass brazing around those two joints. You can see why I decided to do brass brazing here and here, because the joint is not really, there's not a lot of surface area to that joint, so I want to be able to build up a little tiny fillet of brass through that joint. So I'll finish that right now. Again, we're going to push this back to a neutral flame. Of course, doing our brass brazing, we have to get the metal just a bit red. With the silver, we can hover several hundred degrees cooler than the brass, which tends to preserve the metallurgical properties of the chromoly steel. So when we get up red here with the brass, it can have a little bit of a detrimental effect on the metallurgical properties here. Soften it some. If you cool it too fast, of course, it'll make it brittle. The silver braze joints have almost no effect on the metallurgical properties of the steel. That's why I like to use silver. And let's take a peek at the top here, see if we need to do any remelting to kind of clean it up and make it look pretty. I think I'm going to put a little bit more brass in the top. It's only a tack at this point. So we'll reheat here a little bit. And drop just a little bit more brass in that joint. Also looking for any pockets, air pockets that I may have created. Try to float those over and fill them up. A lot of what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get surface tension to kind of hold that brass in a nice place. Here we are, and we have a rack that's about 95% finished. The next thing we'll have to do is put the struts in down here to connect to the seat stays. So we'll be going back to the bike to finish off the rest of this rack.